Guys, welcome back. I have Coach Whitney Reese with me again today. And what we're going to talk about today is a really interesting topic that is pretty pervasive in the sport of fitness and in athletics in general and in fitness in general. And it's how much comparing yourself to others is beneficial versus detrimental. And I think it's a really interesting idea to try to put some kind of a framework around, if there is one, because so many different people have different personalities. But we thought it'd be really fun to kind of dive down some of the rabbit holes. So I'm gonna push back a little bit here and there on Whitney just to kind of see maybe what she thinks and have some fun with it. So Whitney, thanks for coming on. And kind of the way that I would love to start this conversation is quickly walk me through where the times were that you seemed to compare yourself the most to other people. So when were those times?
Oh, I had a couple stages there. So one point in time that I think I compared myself to the people around me initially as a kid was actually between the ages of about 10 to 15. I was in actually a combined karate setting. So me as a 10-year-old, I was in class mostly with adults. And so from the ages of 10 to 15, my experience was comparing how I moved and how I learned different forms and different movements within, at the time it was Aikido and Kaijukido, how the adults would do it, which was a very strange learning environment, to be honest, because the adults noticed that I could repeat a form 5 or 6 times and I could have it down. Range of motion wasn't a problem. It was just kind of like fun. It was playing. And then I would watch the adults and it'd be like, how can you not get in that position? So there were definitely some comparisons there, and I would try to spar, and I would try to do some of the fitness or endurance components of those classes the way the adults could, and there was no way on earth that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I vividly remember doing plank holds and doing push-ups and sit-ups, and as a 10-year-old, like, I'm looking at a person in their 30s, like, I can beat you. And that was not normal. But that was a very vivid stage of comparison that I drastically remember, because it was different than at the same age I was doing tennis. And the other people that were out there with me at tennis, it might have been because I was out there just having fun, but I was in no way competing with anyone else that I was going to tennis practice with. I actually hated going to tennis meets. I went to a couple and I was like, yeah, this isn't so much fun for me. But the experience of watching the other kids in tennis, I was like, oh, that looks cool. But I had no alignment whatsoever to get competitive with it. But put me in a class with 20 adults that are 2 decades plus older than me, and I was like, I can beat you. I It's not like I could try to kick them. Like,
Right.
I think I was maybe 3'5" at that time. Like, I'm still not a tall person, but I would get in and I would spar with guys that were 6 feet tall, and I'd be like, I can punch you. There's no way I
How,
was going to reach them.
how about when you got into high school and college and you had, you were very competitive, at least by definition, athlete. Did you find that you were competing with others, meaning comparing to others, or was that more of your own growth that wasn't factored in so much to others?
High school, I would have to say, was a little bit of both, because at the time I was doing team sports and individual sports. So I was doing basketball and soccer within a team setting. Um, I didn't find myself comparing or competing with other players on my team. I think some of that is I had a defined role.
Mm.
So in basketball, I knew I was a point guard. Like I knew I was not going to be 6 feet tall by that point in my life. And so the only comparisons that I had were 2 or 3 other point guards, and we all had our own individual skill sets. And we all knew, depending on the opponent we were facing, one of us was a more appropriate point guard if the goal was to win the game. So if it was a team that we needed a more aggressive defender that was going to focus more on preventing the other team from scoring points, then I knew that was my role. If we were playing a team that the role of the point guard was to do more off the dribble 3-point shooting, that wasn't really my skill set. So I knew that our other point guard was going to be the starting point guard. I didn't in any way see a need to compete against her to appropriately achieve the goal, which was to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in track, where I was competing individually, there was definitely some competing going on there. But that's because even within practices, to decide who was going to go to each meet each week, because that point, the high school I was at, we had state record holders in every event I did. So we had a state record holder in the 200, the 400, in all the relays, in the long jump and the triple jump. And those were the parts of the track meet that I did. So every practice, there was competing at every single practice. There was not a jump that wasn't a maximum effort jump, where it was like, if I got bruised and cut my skin open in the sand, it really didn't matter, because that determined if I was going to go to the meet to compete. And if I had a bad week in practice, I didn't get to go compete. So that level of individuals for the individual sport definitely changed the competitive environment. There was a lot of, well, her foot position coming off the board is better, so even though my approach is better, I need to drill my foot position to get it maybe to look more like hers. There was a lot of comparing who does what within what skill set, to try to really hone in on maximizing competition. I don't know if it was in any way beneficial emotionally.
Yeah. Why do you think you would or wouldn't compare yourself more in, let's just keep it in a sports setting? Why do you think you would or wouldn't? So it sounds like it's, you talked about the martial arts piece, and that was about adults. You talked about the track piece, and that was more about competing. Like, you wanted to be out on the field, but it didn't seem to bother you as much when maybe that was more of a fluid subbing in and out of the game, like a basketball game. What do you think it was? Like, what led you to feel that demand to compete? Or did you have any coaches or other people that sort of pumped up that demand for comparison?
I would say I've experienced both throughout my entire athletic career. And I probably didn't learn until I was in my 30s that a part of the response is probably my personality. That I'm pretty linear, meaning I'm very goal oriented. I like direct inputs, but I can be rather unemotional. And so that's just the essence of me as a person. Like, we joke with my parents that I'll go, yeah, that's exciting. And they're like, you don't look excited. And I'm like, well, close your eyes. Imagine I'm jumping up and down and clapping my hands, and you're now seeing me be excited, but that's exciting. And that's about the extent of the emotional response. So as an athlete going through those environments, and this is kind of learning yourself as a person, if a coach was trying to get me emotionally tied to a drill or a skill, or an outcome of a game. For me as an individual, the way to do that was not an emotional response, because that just isn't my essence. So the appeal of them externally trying to pull that out of me instead was like, why would I behave that way? Me getting upset or not doesn't change the outcome of what I'm about to do. And so the appeal, if it was very thought-based or goal-oriented, I could align to it. And I didn't realize that until I was in my 30s of, oh, those are all the coaches that I think they were banging their head against a wall trying to see an emotional response when that just is not my essence. And I had plenty of teammates that was a great way to appeal to them, but it wasn't going to change how hard I worked.
It's interesting when I definitely have compared myself in different situations. But I, like you, it was always about taking the next step forward in my ability level. Like it was always about that. And just to be fair, I think that I still feel that way here and there when I need to up level something. So when you look at other folks, and let's probably put you and I more on the linear, less emotional side of the coin, generally speaking, because it's true. The folks who are on the more emotional side of things, what do you think some of the signs of perhaps over comparing, or some of the signs of when it's a good thing versus when it's a bad thing could emerge?
Oh, that's a good one. Recently, with working with individuals that are completing residencies, which is it's a painful, uncomfortable process. Seeing the individuals that are more tied emotionally to that outcome is a very painful process for them. So a consequence of it is taking on all of the outcome onto yourself. That's not helpful. So an example is, let's say it's a client that's having a bad day and I am not able to set that linear stop there. I can't take all of that on to me. I can't be a hero. I can't fix it. I can lay a path for how to get them there. But if that client, for example, is comparing themselves to another athlete, so let's take this to the level of competition. If they are comparing their history, meaning how they grew up, how they ate, how they slept, the things they have done in life to the point in time they are now, all of that would have had to have been identical for the two of them. And they would have had to have had the same genetics and the same experiences and the same training for then in the moment to say, I should be doing this like that person. And in reality, that is never going to happen. I have cousins that are identical twins. Even though their genetics are identical, and even though they had the same mom, same dad, they still played the same sports together, they still had the same friends, despite them being identical twins, Lacey does not pretend to be Aaron, and Aaron does not pretend to be Lacey. They acknowledge that even though there are things about them that are similar, how they choose to respond to them and how they choose to live their lives, how they eat, how they sleep, even the personality of their husbands, it's still different. So in the moment to get into those comparisons, as a linear person, it's pretty easy to step back and say, why do I feel the need to compare myself to someone other than myself? However, when you're in the emotional component, it is very hard to stop that and say, what is the name of the emotion I am experiencing? And why am I experiencing that emotion? And what do I expect to get out of this emotion? And that does come up in group training. And by group training, I mean even individuals in the same space training differently. Is a part of human nature is to watch. That's part of how we learn, is to watch. But I also have to acknowledge, if I'm watching someone other than me do that, even if I try doing it the same way, our experiences are different. And so if their calf is a centimeter longer than mine, there's no way I'm going to be able to make my calf the same exact calf as theirs, to be able to do that the same way.
So you are essentially saying that the act of comparison, let's just call it when unchecked, is essentially unhelpful in that it doesn't give you a factual playing field. So it might be beneficial to feel a push. It might be beneficial to see somebody succeeding. But if you're saying, why am I not doing it exactly like them, or I'm too fixated on that other person, versus having the awareness around the emotion that you were just talking about, you can't create a go forward path that is most uniquely beneficial to you. Is that what you're saying essentially?
Very, very much so. We all have things we can control, things we can't control, and things we can influence. And if I'm comparing myself to someone else, I have already put myself in the box of things I can't control and things that I might or might not be able to influence. And if I continue to focus on that external thing, I now am no longer focused on the things I can control and the things that I can influence. I can influence myself. I can control myself. If I'm emotional and I lose control of myself, I still can find a way to learn and adapt and face that. It's part of being an adult. But the second that focus is outside of me, and until we figure out how to telepathically control people outside of us, I could sit and watch someone else and compare my image of self to them as long as I want. Me staring at someone else is never going to make me look like them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily something that's helpful.
Yeah. So, gosh, we're going to have to call it there for right now. I think we could continue on this conversation in a lot of different ways, but something I think for us all to think about is, are we aware enough of when that's happening? And if we are aware that it's happening, do we have the foresight to think through how is this beneficial or not? And I think that one of the most important things that we could all do is to just ask ourselves, when are we feeling like we're comparing ourselves to others the most way? And you had a great secondary question, which is, what is the emotion I feel and why do I feel that emotion around it? And I think that there's so much to be learned in that moment that can get us back onto that, let's just call it that linear pathway that could be really beneficial to come back into our own bodies and say, what do I need to do to have the most success at this point? It's also the rise of the psychology coach, right? The sports psychologist. So anyways, Whitney, I really appreciate it. As always, you make me think of a million different things, and we appreciate you guys listening to us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.